Hi, I'm Laura Beaver, and I'm here with Trisha Owsley for this version of Voices from the Field for the Supervisor Support Network. Trisha, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your practice and kind of what you have going on right now?
Yeah, Laura, thanks so much for having me today. So I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor with a supervision designation in the state of Ohio, also licensed as an LPC in West Virginia. So I have private practice. I've been in my private practice for about 3.5 years. And right now, I specialize in trauma work. I also do some supervision with other counselors. Right now I have a ton going on. I have some speaking engagements, talking about stress, burnout, resiliency, and how to manage those things. I also have a suicide prevention webinar coming up to try to, help save lives because it's such a public health crisis right now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about, how you got into supervising and, why you feel like that's an important role for you to have in your practice?
Well, obviously, for counselors, at least in my state, I think most states, it's required by our licensing board. In Ohio, we have, and different states call it different things. In Ohio, it's the Counselor Social Worker Marriage and Family Therapist Board. It's kind of a mouthful. I think in West Virginia, it's the Board of Examiners in Counseling. So all states have boards that's called something similar, and
Mhm.
they all have requirements. So, myself coming up through the field, I think my state in Ohio is 150 hours of supervision with someone with a supervision designation. And I, had some good experiences, some not so good experiences with that. And like really now I love teaching counseling. And so this is also my way of giving back to the field.
Yeah, I love that. And I think all of us have some sort of mishap or horror story of whether it's when we were a student or in the field of just something goes awry and how much you realize in that moment how much supervision is so important and how much you
Right.
need a quality supervisor helping you along the way. And yeah, like just the way that it gives back to the field. I love that part about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think from graduate school when I did internship, I have a little tea trauma from that experience. I remember my professor watched a recording I had to do with a client, and the feedback I got was like not great. It's like counseling is more than just having a conversation with a client. I'm like, I know that, but that felt horrible. So
Yeah. I am, Brene Brown says that learning is really vulnerable. And I think it's so important for us to remember that when we're supervising. And for us still as clinicians out in the field, we're still learning. It's not like we have everything figured out within the world of, therapy. And so there's something very tender about being a student or even being a pre-licensed or like under the supervision umbrella where you're just still learning so much and how vulnerable and scary that can feel for sure.
Laura, I think we have to have the mindset as professionals in a helping profession. Like, yeah, we don't have all the answers. Everyone is different and unique and has their own skill set and talents. And like, even as supervisors, I think there's vulnerability in learning. I know as a field, a professional field, we go by science and evidence-based um, modalities, but a lot of what we do is an art too. There's a lot of philosophy in what we do.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I was talking to somebody earlier and we were talking about how, there's what you learn in the book and then there's how it actually plays out in the room, right? And where the rubber meets the road looks really different when you're reading it in a textbook than when you're actually doing it.
Yeah. I was doing supervision just this morning, and a couple new um, EMDR trained therapists, and they had all kinds of questions because I have quite a bit of experience doing EMDR therapy. And like, you just have to practice it. You just have to jump in and do it and get support doing it. You have to start somewhere. You have to try. You have to jump in.
Absolutely. Well, what is your favorite part about being in the role of a supervisor?
Oh gosh, there's so much I like about it. I think teaching would be my most favorite thing about it, and just advancing like another generation of therapists coming up behind me that gets to continue this work. As counselors, we sit with people in the trenches, I call it, like during some of their darkest moments. And I think that's an honor that our clients trust us with that vulnerability, as you mentioned. And I really love teaching trauma informed approach. That's really important to me. I really love teaching about suicide prevention. And I also live in rural Appalachia in Southeast Ohio. So I really also love advocating for, people in poverty-stricken areas where accessibility isn't, accessibility to mental health care is not always easy.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes. And what have you found to be some of the harder parts of being a supervisor?
Oh, definitely. I have some more little T trauma there that I've experienced. Working in a community setting, which I'm not right now, but in the past I have, some counselors or dependently licensed folks have had some growth opportunities, and there was some resistance. So that was really a challenging time for me. Also handling like, in that setting, disciplinary type of issues is just never fun. It just feels really icky.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes those are the things that we as supervisors just need support and other people around us that are like, okay, yeah, I've been there. You're not alone. Or like, hey, this happened to me. This is what I did. Because sometimes you just can't even imagine some of the situations you get into when you're, supervising students or, um, pre-licensed professionals. I remember when I was doing like I used to be a field director at a university, and I used to say never, because as soon as I would say, well, I've never had a student in this situation, it inevitably would happen. And it's scary when you're the one in charge or when you're the one with the liability. And so
Mhm.
really having support is part of why, we exist and how we want to try to connect supervisors, because you're right. That can be really scary because it's part of your like professional and your livelihood, and it's hard to have hard conversations with other professionals. When we're with clients, it's different. It's a different role we have, but with supervision it can be really difficult and hard.
Yeah, as supervisors, we're kind of like gatekeepers of the profession, and we have specific professional standards and ethics that we have to abide by. And we have to make sure those operating under our license are abiding by these things too. So sometimes it's really difficult to have those conversations, but like I think what you're saying is right. I personally, like, I think a lot of therapists, we don't handle conflict well just by nature.
Yeah.
So, it helps me to try to take more of a supportive role, and just hope that the supervisee can go along with that and not be too resistant. That doesn't always work. Sometimes you do have to have firm boundaries.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's funny that I think, yeah, a lot of us therapists don't love conflict, even though
Right.
there's something about being a therapist that you have to bring up hard subjects, but it's different when it's outside of that room for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I can do it clinically as a therapist, easy,
Yeah.
easy. And it's not confrontational in a negative way, but as a supervisor, I've had to set some pretty firm boundaries just because of resistance, and it was really uncomfortable.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think has changed in the world of supervision, over the last 4 years, especially since COVID? Like, what are some things that you've seen just with people you've worked with or just in general in that role of being a supervisor?
Good question. I think since COVID, and I personally, I've seen more of a move toward telehealth
Mhm.
and less in-person work, which I personally, my practice is doing telehealth, so I don't see clients in person. And that's been since the COVID shutdown initially in 2020. So I've seen that happen. The profession is adjusted quite well, I think, to performing virtual services. My experience, and I think all the research is saying it's just as effective as in person from a scientific perspective. Same thing with supervision. I'm doing that virtually. A lot of therapists or supervisors are moving to doing virtual supervision. And that's, again, pretty effective. And it's a good way to be able to reach more people than just in your geographic area. So you get to have more of an impact. And I love that. The other thing I think more majorly that I've seen, not to compare, COVID was bad in its own right. It certainly wasn't easy, but I think seeing like a lot of racial trauma coming up,
Mm,
a
mm-hmm.
lot of gender type of issues coming up. Um, that has been one of the major things in the political climate. uh,
Mm-hmm.
just the division I've seen has caused a lot of stress in the profession, and that's definitely new. It's definitely new.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what you're making a really good point too of like, as a clinician, we have to know where we stand in our own values and our own worldview and beliefs and hold that everybody else has the right and entitlement to their own. And how, with a client, part of our job is learning how to not impose those things on our clients. But even with each other as professionals, how do we try to interact with each other, knowing that
Mhm.
we may not all have the same points of view or values or beliefs, and that piece with supervision too could be a thing that would be difficult, I can imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you have to know where you personally stand, but also being able to be objective about that.
Hmm.
Let hold space for other people. Um, Someone said that there's more than one way to go about getting an answer. There's no one right way. Like sometimes maybe I'm not right.
Hmm.
And I want space to be able to learn where I can improve. And also knowing I have biases and I want to work on uncovering those and doing better myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned, for part of what where you live and kind of what you do is, helping to provide more access to mental health services. Do you find that access to supervision is also difficult in your area, or like how do people have a hard time finding a supervisor, or is there an abundance of supervisors available? What's it like where you are?
Yeah, there's really not a lot of access to supervisors. I know right now, I can say, as far as I know, Laura, I'm probably the only um, private practice within probably a 30-mile radius.
Wow.
It's that scattered. And I would say supervisors, there's a few of us locally. I think that we have the need covered, but we're stretched thin.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's so awesome to hear about the work you're doing, and what a need that you're filling, in your community and with the new people in the profession. And I have to believe too that like it has to be so important to you to make sure that you're sort of like ushering in quality, amazing clinicians to your community that you care so much about, knowing that there is such a lack, of accessibility and things like that. And so I think it even just speaks more volumes about the work you're doing and making sure that your community is being served through the process of supervision as well.
Absolutely. It's just really important to me that um, consumers, anyone, knowing that mental health care isn't just for people with severe mental illness, it's
Hmm.
for people like you and me. It's for anybody experiencing any kind of distress or needing support. And, in addition to all those things mentioned, just reducing the stigma around mental health and addiction issues. Um, and it's really important to me to usher in a new group of young therapists that have great skills that make people feel a sense of safety to be able to be open and, again, vulnerable. That's a theme, I
Mhm.
guess, today, to be able to work toward health and well-being.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, tell people, where can they find out more about you or your practice, or, supervision with you?
Yeah, thanks. You can find me at www.connectiveclinicalwellness.com. You can also find me on Facebook or Instagram at Connective Clinical Wellness. I'm also on Facebook, Trisha Owsley, Owsley. And yeah, you can find me at any of those places.
Awesome. And I'll have links to all that below in our notes. And just thank you again for your time and for just sharing some of your expertise with our audience today.
Thanks for having me.